Okay, we're all having trouble with this guy. There we go. It is indeed an honor to introduce our keynote speaker. Orson could have appointed a fellow Marine or anyone qualified to do his introduction, but I'm humbled that it fell to me. But first, Orson has permitted me a few moments of philosophizing to set the stage for his introduction. Some were going to think this is an odd tangent that I'm going on, but some of the rest of you, especially author historians, will understand. When you study and write history, and at times there are spiritual aspects to the work. I write in my books that our ancestors want their stories told. And I found this slide on the internet from another author saying about the same thing. If you spend enough time with ancestors and heroic heroes, historic heroes, it becomes rather obvious that I could not be telling the story on my own or only with the records and sources available to me. Someone else is helping in ways that could not possibly be coincidence. Many of you who have toured battlefields know what I'm talking about. Clayton Cools of MIArecoveries.org knows about this. They have found 27 missing aircraft from the Himalayan hump operation and 279 personnel listed since World War II as missing in action. He's helped me with my book, My Father Flew the Hump Operation. He wrote me last month and said that when reaching a crash site, often after days or weeks of trekking in mountain jungles, he feels the presence of those men. That's why he spent over $100,000 of his own funds to do this. He told me there is nothing else he would rather be doing with his life. If you've been to the Wall in DC, you also probably know what I'm talking about. Now, this painting illustrates this. St. Jerry was a theological historian in the 4th century, renowned for translating the Bible into Latin from ancient Greek manuscripts. No one knew how he did it. So he's depicted here with an angel providing much needed insights. St. Jerome was famously inspired by a dream. I met Orson in January when I gave my presentation on B-17 heroes I have known to Cooper's Troopers. It's a wonderful Marine veterans group in Arvada. Grady Birdsong will tell you all about Cooper's Troopers. If you're lucky, he'll invite you to luncheon. Then about 10 days later, I had a very odd dream. It was about cleaning out the junk in the shed of years of accumulated worthless mementos. The dream had a powerful influence on me, though. It caused me to get up early, go to the shed with a trash bag and a Goodwill box, determined to clean things out. I opened a trunk, and the first thing that popped out at me was this MIA POW bracelet that I wore in high school and college. I and many of my friends wore these bracelets because we were all affected by the war, and we cared about the men and women who went in our stead, including my brother, and with many of them lost. We wore these as a statement of everyone's deep feelings about that war. But I was never even curious about who W.P. Yarborough was. Though I looked at that name every day for some years, it was just a name that symbolized all the MIAs and POWs and the traumas all were going through in the Vietnam era. Then I thought, hey, we now live in the Google age. I typed the name in. I was astonished to discover William Pleasant Yarborough was shot down on January 19, 1967 in his A-6 Intruder. I just wanted to mention Bear Owen also flew this aircraft in Vietnam, as did Colonel Paller. Yarborough's parachute failed to open. He was assumed missing in action and assumed killed. 18 years later, in 1985, his remains were identified and returned to the United States. So thanks to meeting Orson and then very shortly after having a strange dream that I get to play a small role in furthering the memory of William Yarborough. But the internet postings on Yarborough noted that his pilot on that mission was United States Navy Captain Alan Brady. He survived the bailout and spent almost 7 years as a POW. The posting mentioned he now lived in Pensacola. I searched county records and found an address matching the name and sent a blind letter of introduction. A week later, his wife replied by email. She said, Alan is 95, still gets around well. She thanks God for him every day. He would very much like to attend this symposium if he could. He and Orson know each other. Alan said he thinks of the fateful day losing Yarborough many times over. Bill Yarborough was a navigator he'd gladly have flown with on any mission, and he was always sorry he never had enough opportunities to thank Bill for sharing the cockpit with him. William Yarborough was a great fella. Thank you. Alan sends his regards to Orson and said communication was limited in Hanoi, but certainly never amiss for words at any of the non-POW reunions once back in the USA. The non-POWs will always hold a special place in my heart, he said. We shall all meet again one day. Alan Brady wrote a book, Witnessing the American Century. Now, Orson told me that having me tell this little story would be a good backdrop for his intro. Orson's name was also on thousands of these bracelets. He said it was very important to them. So, when you write and talk on veteran history, you have the privilege of meeting men and women who have achieved more and endured more for their country than many of the rest of us can comprehend. Our keynote speaker is in that category. He was an F-8 Crusader pilot. That's a supersonic attack fighter. It's the first fighter to fly faster than 1,000 miles per hour. He flew over 200 missions from the Da Nang Air Base in Vietnam with the Death Angel Squadron. On his last scheduled mission, number 205, he was shot down over North Vietnam. Now, imagine being shot down on your last mission when you're about to go home. And then he was imprisoned for nearly 7 years in several POW prisons, including the infamous Hanoi Hilton. Recall the story of John McCain. Orson was a cellmate of McCain. This was almost 7 years of severe deprivation, beatings, and torture. He returned from war and was reinstated as fighter pilot, flying the Skyhawk and other types. He received 20 decorations, including 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit with Combat V, 2 Bronze Star Medals with Combat V, 2 Purple Hearts, 2 personal and 11 Strike Flight Awards of the Air Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V, the Combat Action Ribbon, the Prisoner of War Medal, the Meritorious Service Award, and others. He retired from the Marine Corps in 1979 with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. So maybe I should stop talking now so that Orson can speak, but I'm not finished yet. In the Reagan administration, Orson became U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. In 94 and 96, he ran for Congress from Hawaii. In 97, he became Commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission of the United States. Incidentally, he had worked on the campaigns of his friends Ross Perot and John McCain. On September 2nd, 2008, he gave the opening speech on the second day of the Republican National Convention. It certainly is my privilege to introduce Colonel, Assistant Secretary, Commissioner Orson Swindle.
I'm glad I'm not out in the audience, because if I stood up that quickly, I'd just spill right over. This has been a marvelous day, and thank you all for staying here for this length of time. That's dedication, and it's for a good cause. You're recognizing service of some great people. I heard some stories today that I've not heard the likes of. I know of the Donut Dollies. I have several Donut Dolly friends. I know of Diane Evans, Carlson Evans, who, if you've been to Washington, D.C. or around the Vietnam Memorial, there is a memorial right there beside the three servicemen of three nurses, one looking up to the sky, waiting on the helicopter to get to them. Diane was responsible for that, and she's been fighting cancer, and I'm happy to tell you she's doing pretty darn well getting over it, and she's recovering as well as anyone could, and she's a remarkable lady. But you know, to meet people personally who've done these kind of things is very, very rewarding to me, because it was a side of combat that I did not see. And I want to make something very clear here before I get started talking about me. It's not about me. I'm just going to tell you my story, because perhaps this will entertain you, if that's the right word. And you will experience what I've just experienced listening to all these stories, because you've never heard this story before. But I want to make a point. The heroes in Vietnam were the troops on the ground and those people who support him. Never doubt that at all. I am so in awe with my Marine friends, even Grady, I'm in awe of him too. My Marine friends who are, you know, in various places that I was a little bit familiar with, because I flew in support of Marines in I Corps, is that what we call it, I Corps, and in particular up around the DMZ. And the fighting there was somewhat restricted because we couldn't fly over the DMZ back in those days, but it changed, as Grady and his friends can tell you. They fought mighty battles and suffered dearly. And I have nothing but respect for the troops on the ground. And we Marines like to think the reason we fly those airplanes is to support Marines on the ground. And it was an honor to be a part of that in my short life. I'm 88, just turned 88. And to show you that I couldn't jump up, I just had a heart valve replacement about 4 weeks ago. And I'm struggling through it, but I'm getting better with each passing day. But this is the operation that several in here have already told me they experienced, where they crack you open from your neck down to your groin and break the chest bone and open you up. And my God, I remember people having that. I got it the easy way. They just went up through the vein, went into the heart, and the doctor said, we're going to push that heart valve out of the way and put this other one in, and we'll take the thing out. And I said, I have one question. That old heart valve you pushed aside, where did it go? And they sort of chuckled, and then they said, we're going to anchor the new one on that one. But I'm happy to be here with you in more ways than one. Thank you, thank you. Well, I've got a lot of, I got to tell you a drill I went through the last couple of days. I sat down and just off the top of my head, started writing down things that I thought you might be interested in. And I got up to 20 and quit writing because we only have so much time to do these things. But I'm going to sort of go through an experience you probably don't know a hell of a lot about, which is understandable. I don't wish that on anybody. But I'm just going to sort of cover what happened to me. Again, what happened to me happened to every single one of the POWs, perhaps up until right at the last of the war, when they were too busy getting the living daylights blown out of them, and they quit torturing the guys. But they did treat them brutally, even the ones right at the end of the war. But this happened. What happened to me happened to every single one of us. I was POW. We were always trying to entertain ourselves by tapping through walls and doing strange things. When were you shot down? Okay, November the 11th, 1966. Okay, we've got a list that we keep mentally. Everything was done mentally. And we think you're number 144 captured in North Vietnam, so I'm 144. So, you know, we had up to 600, so there are a lot of us. But I want to go through what happened to me so you'll give you an experience of what some Americans, and I might add, just remarkable Americans, went through. And I'm going to start off, I'm going to use notes because I'm going to breeze over a lot of it. And if we have any time left, which I suspect we don't because we've been sort of shortened on how much time we can spend here. But I want to start with getting shot down. How about that? It's a good start. I'm flying my last mission. The squadron is rotating to Japan. I'm stuck in a staff job over the wing, but I'm flying every couple of days with the squadron, and I'm amassing all these hours of flying to combat and flying missions, which doesn't amount to much. Nellie, I think, said he flew well over 300. My God, I don't know how anybody survives that, because they were flying in bad places. I was not flying in bad places. I just happened to be flying in a bad place the day I got shot down. I forgot to duck, in other words. But, March the 11th, that's not a good, November the 11th, that's not a real good day to go out and start shooting at people. And they shot back and they got me. I was pulling off a bomb run, dropping 2,000-pound bombs. I heard Nellie explaining the A6 could carry 4 2,000-pound bombs. The F8 couldn't do those kind of things. But I pulled off. I was hit underneath the fuselage. Airplane went out of control. I lost hydraulic power and no controls. It went up and went down at a higher rate of speed. I ejected about 450 to 500 knots, and I was immediately captured by a lot of people. And they treated me very poorly, which, I just bombed them. So you can't really get mad with them, but that's the way I was introduced to North Vietnam. I want to comment on one to emphasize a point I made just a while ago. How many of you know who Bing West is? Bing is a Marine. He is a prolific author. He has written countless books about the Iraq War, Vietnam War, and so forth. The story relates to Bing. It's how I met him. I'm up on a mission. I've got 2,000-pound bombs. I get a call on guard channel saying, "Don't drop your ordnance. We have an emergency. We go over to this place is over near Ashau Valley," and they said, "Switch over this frequency." I get to the frequency. I'm called by the airborne FAC. He said, "We got this squad of Marines, or number of Marines, and they're on one side of a hill and a battalion of North Vietnamese on the other side of the hill, and they're going to get captured here in a very short time." And I'm heading over there at a rather fast rate of speed. And as most of you probably know, when you bomb next to your friendlies, you bomb parallel to their front lines. You don't come over the top of them. Well, I don't know where he is. I'm rushing over to this general area, and finally he says, "Okay, here's what we got." And he told me about the Marines. He said, "What kind of ordnance have you got?" I said, "I got 2,000-pound bombs." He said, "Oh my God." He said, these people are in danger. They're looking at the faces of the North Vietnamese. So I said, "Well, what do you want to do?" He said, "We got to do it." So I come in over our troops. I'm flying over our guys. If I drop short, I drop on them. Well, God was with me, because when I punched those two suckers off, the flame it must have felt like a whale giving birth, accelerating up in the air, and I pulled off. It looked like Hiroshima down there, and the fact came up and said, "The Marine says you hit right in the middle of the bad guys, but don't drop any more of those bombs." And many years later, I would meet Bing West, and we became the best of friends. And every book he writes now, he sends me a copy and says, "This book would not be possible had you not intervened in my life." So that's my combat experience in Vietnam. I want to talk about getting shot down, getting captured, what happened, and then go and tell some stories about a few people that are very important to me. I was subjected, just like every other POW, to gross torture, beatings, tourniquets on your arms, on your legs, your feet and hands swelling up to 4 or 5 times larger than they are, beatings endlessly, deprivation, no food, you name it. That's the way our life was, off and on. Not all the time, because had it been all the time, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I'd be dead. But that's the nature of how we were treated. And you were kept in a solo cell, single person cell most of the time, especially the first couple of years you're there. And you got nothing to go on but what's inside of you. When they call you out for an interrogation, you either respond or they start torturing you again. So you're sitting there weighing all these circumstances. How the hell did I survive? I happened to have read a report right before I shot down that the Army and Navy and maybe the Air Force had done a study trying to estimate how long it was going to take us to win in Vietnam. That in itself was an interesting concept. But the smallest number of years was 6 or 5, I think. So when I got shot down, I'm thinking, 5 years? How in the world am I going to survive this? And I all of a sudden am introduced to this problem of trying to, in your mind, control your emotions and facing reality and doing the best you can while being scared to death that the obvious truth is going to happen. You're stuck, and there's not much of a way. They're not going to enter the water, let me out, and no angel's going to come down and pluck me out unless I'm dead. So it was a horrible dilemma, but each and every one of us met this, and we all suffered torture. To my knowledge, virtually everyone, if not everyone, wrote statements of propaganda. All of us, without talking to one another, because we didn't have that kind of communication in those days, we would screw up the language of whatever we said to where if any American heard that, they say, this guy's not doing this out of being a volunteer to do it. He's obviously under stress. But we went through this all these years, and it never seemed to end. Most of us had no contact with our families. Most of our families, well, I shouldn't say most because I don't know that for a fact, but many of our families did not know whether we were alive or dead. I was reported missing in action, seen on the ground or something to that effect, presumed captive, but then nobody heard anything from me. I made up my mind early on I was going to try to do my damnedest to stay away from any camera that was in sight. I didn't want my picture being used for propaganda. And I didn't get to write home. There were no pictures to indicate that I was alive. And I was successful in that. To my knowledge, there was never a picture taken to me, at least made public, the whole time I was there. So it was my one little victory in that whole process other than surviving. But it was a daunting task psychologically to deal with the fact that you're looking at being in jail for 4 or 5 or 6 years. To give you some ideas of what some Americans went through, we had one prisoner of war down in I can't think of his name right now, forgive me, my memory is fading. At 88, you can do a little bit of that. But an Army POW, a Special Forces guy was there 9 years. Everett Alvarez was there over 8 years. Bob Shoemaker over 8 years. And then a potload of folks, 7 years. Another load of people, 6 years, 5, and then 4, 3, 2, and some in 1972. It's an amazing number of people to endure what they endured and to have done it so darn well. I attribute, first, our typical life was the doors would be open with keys. We would be given a stale piece of bread, and then we'd be given a bowl of weed soup. We refer to it as sewer grass soup. And then we'd have cabbage soup. And cabbage and pumpkin seemed to grow in 6-month cycles. So every meal we had during one cycle was pumpkin and cabbage. And my current wife, had the audacity years ago when we first got married. She wanted to lose some weight and wanted me to join the process of losing weight. And she read that cabbage soup was a good diet food. And I came on one night and she had cabbage soup. I said, this is not going to go well. So we quit eating cabbage soup. But we had no physical hygiene materials. We had a little pitcher of boiled water a day. Fed 2 meals a day. I got down to about 120 pounds, we estimated. And about 1969, it had rained a lot. We were out at Sante Camp, and I'll tell you a few stories about Sante Camp. And the vat that we were dipping water on us, it had filled up from the rain. It was like a cistern. And we found a can, and we estimated the volume of the can by figuring out the dimensions of it. We're all a bunch of college graduates being aviators. That's how we got shot down, being smart. But anyway, we figured out this can, and we decided we would do if one of us got in the cistern, and the water flowed over the spout, we could catch the water, and then we could determine how much we weighed. You all know how to do that, I'm sure. I flunked some of those courses at Georgia Tech, but we did this, and the guys who were the smartest estimated I weighed about 120 pounds, which is not a lot of weight. But anyway, it was a horrendous experience. The endless torturing. They kept me awake on a stool for 2 weeks. I went nuts after about 10 days, I'm told. Other people related this to me. They knew what was going on over there, and just little things like that. Kneeling on your knees on a gravel floor. Try that when you have nothing else to do at home. You're holding your hands up against the wall. If you don't hold your hands up against the wall and kneel on your knees, you get beaten. Rifle butts to the back of the head. So everything we did was always a threat hanging over us. That's a psychological burden, certainly. It's an anger burden, but you can't lash out because you're not going to win that one. They outnumber you. But it was a very difficult survival thing. There are words, for God's sake, I don't mean to make it out to be, for instance, I tell you right now, Americans that were captured by the Japanese in World War II went through a hell of a lot more than we went through, and they didn't survive it. We survived what we went through. But we figured out fairly early on, because of what the interrogators would say to us from time to time, and just the way they handled us, we were convinced that we were going to be the ransom chips to get the United States out of Vietnam, and the price would be very high to get us out. That's exactly what happened. But it was a difficult, long journey. There were, who was responsible for this? When I was first moved in with cellmates, I was moved in with Ron Stores and Wes Shireman and George McKnight, all three Air Force captains. I walked in there, the Vietnamese had beaten me up quite a bit in interrogation. I'd written a statement, which is, again, we bastardized everything we wrote. And I just got in there, and these guys, I'd been hearing through the communication system what good resistors they were. And I walked in, and my first cellmate, it was about 6 months after I'm captured. And I say immediately, it's the middle of the night, they came and got me. I was the only prisoner still without a cellmate. And our cells, by the way, were not like jail cells. They were solid walls, concrete walls, windows, but the window was always sealed up with some big piece of plywood. But anyway, when I got in there, I said, hey guys, I want to tell you, I've really let you down. I'm Orson Swindle, I'm a Marine, I'm ashamed of what I've done. And I want you to know I admire what you've done because I've heard about it. And George McKnight, who had the most infectious laughter, he was a bachelor, and he laughed out loud. He said, Orson, you're listening at the Ernest Hemingway of North Vietnam. I've written more of that crap. He said, when they get you, they got you. And said, you're going to do something to stop the pain and perhaps to save your life. So I got off to a good start with some tough guys, but all of us to this day will tell you we still have a guilt complex, if you want to call it, about giving them propaganda, usable material. But, when you think you're dying, you're going to try to get out of it. And, we did a lot of lying and got away with a lot of lying. But it was not uncommon for all of us, not uncommon at all for all of us to admit to feeling guilty about that. And everybody that went through it will tell you quickly, you did the best you could, and that's all you could do. That's what we expected of each other. So that's the aspect. As I said, the food, the health. We were subject to all sorts of ailments. Very little medicine. The medicine we did see from time to time would be from Poland or some communist satellite country that's about 20 years old at the bottom, used by such and such 1938. It was pretty bad. Let me look at my notes here. I want to talk about Sante. I mentioned being at Sante, and that's where the Raiders came in, Special Forces came in. Unfortunately, we had just moved, and they didn't pick it up, and it was not their fault. There were some Russians, as I recall, in the camp, so they saw evidence of people, so they made the assault on the camp just a clean sweep. I mean, they destroyed a few Russians, I understand, but Sante is sort of a special place. After Ho Chi Minh died in '69, I'm called in for an interrogation. He died in September, as I recall. And immediately we could see that something had changed. Our families were raising hell. A lot of attention is coming across that we're being tortured. Doug Hegdahl, I think about that time, had come home. He's a Navy seaman that fell off the back of his boat, his ship, excuse me, Navy people, ship. And I guess they get rather hot down in the bowels, and he was a very junior enlisted guy, and he went up at night to lay down on the ship and rolled off when it turned, and he got captured, and he was held as a prisoner. And, he did a remarkable job. But Sante, we were using it for language training, but we'd have interrogations, and these people would come in and start talking to us, and one day one's got me in there, and I'm sitting in a little stool, always you're lower than they are. And he's telling me, he said, we have a great culture in Vietnam. I said, I didn't talk to him. I kept a scowl on my face. In fact, one of them said, the reason we don't treat you any better is because you have a very ugly face. You never smile. And I said, that's right, that's me. But he's bragging about the culture. And I said, well, we got a great culture in the United States. I was up to about here. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, we've got a great culture. He said, well, what do you do? Well, how do you celebrate your culture? I said, I described the German folk Oktoberfest. I described it with kids dancing around in the lederhosen and running with the maypole strings and ribbons around the thing. And the oompa bands are going, and I described the food and everything. And he's listening to all this stuff, and he said, well, what is the day? I said, it's National Donut Day. This is a few weeks before November the 10th, which is the Marine Corps anniversary, which is a sacred day for us. So anyway, the conversation goes in, well, how do you do this? And I explain, I'm making all this stuff up right off the top of my head, and he's writing copious notes. And he's got this, now what is it? National Donut Day. What's a donut? And so I tell him it's like that moldy bread you give us once in a while. About every 6 months, we get moldy bread, literally, moldy bread that had been dipped in pig fat, I'm sure, boiling pig fat, and then they sprinkle a little salt on it. I mean, sugar on it, and it was like manna from heaven. We were so hungry. So I describe it in that light. I said, you don't have a donut, but it's sort of like these things, you folks. So lo and behold, on November the 10th, across from a couple of buildings over from me, I hear somebody whistling the Marine Corps hymn. And it came up to us. They opened the door, and we got a basket of these sticky buns, as we call them. So I'm given credit for making the North Vietnamese communists celebrate the Marine Corps birthday, 1969. You've got to be creative. Let me just speak a little bit about who we were and why we survived. One of the primary reasons, we had great leadership, but we were just young. I was a captain. We were pretty young guys, less than 30 years old. Some of the smartest people we had in the POW population were ensigns. That one in particular, Ralph Gaither, could do anything with his hands. He made gadgets. We would communicate by tapping on the wall. We came up with creative ways to do that. We swept when we were taken outside to sweep the courtyard, which was a penalty, a dirty job. We swept the tap codes. And we could transmit, for half a mile doing that, sweeping that. we came up with a solution to them having a purge, and they called us communicating, and they cut off our connection with a group that used the same shower stalls. We got to use about once every 3 months. And this young Ralph Gaither said, I've got an idea. He pulled a string out of the blanket we had, and he tied knots for our tap code. Our tap code was the matrix of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, G. We'd skip the letter K, so you got a 5 by 5 matrix. So if you want to tap the word cat, you tap 1, the first line, and then you 1, 2, 3. I mean, 1 and 1 for A. C is 1 and 3, and then A is tap, tap, and then T is down to the fourth line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He tied knots in a string with a message that we were going to hang over the shower area out there when we got out, and when we got a chance to sweep. And this is very complicated. This takes weeks, by the way, months, and we swept on the floor or in the patio area there. Said pick up string, and we said told them where we were going to leave it, hanging it over something. And about 3 weeks later, somebody from that other camp comes back and said, we found the string but didn't know what to do with it, so we threw it away. So back we got to pull the string out of the blanket and start tying knots. But, we just never stopped fighting them. We considered being a POW. We were just in a different damn battlefield, and it went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, I hate to say it, days a year, and years. We fought and fought and fought and resisted. You can't get belligerent. You can't lose your cool, because you're going to lose that one. I have no doubts. They were told if we got physically out of hand, just kill us or shoot us or beat us up to the point where we can't resist. And that's stupid, because we all knew pretty soon this was going to be a long, long session. And we had no alternative but to survive it, resist, don't give them a damn thing. And, we had rules that Admiral Stockdale, Captain Stockdale at the time, he established some rules how we would judge, how we would conduct ourselves. The code of conduct, of course, applied, but he had special rules because we had special circumstances, and it worked. And Jim Stockdale, we had leaders. Jim Stockdale, one of the smartest people I've ever known in my life. He's a dear friend of mine. He learned, he's a very much was an intellectual, a stoic. I have to go in and read about stoicism if you want to know how he thinks. But he basically said you just can't waste time bemoaning your plight in life. You've got to keep fighting. You just can't give up because it's hopeless. Don't ever do that. And he was such an inspiration. But we had, I'm going to mention some names because some of you may very well have served with them or under them. But Jerry Denton, Robbie Reisner of the Air Force, who's got to be one of the finest men I ever met in my life. John McCain was there. I'll talk a little bit about John later, but we just had marvelous people. Billy Lawrence, I could go on forever. These are dear friends of mine, and all of them are gone now for the most part. But they were all heroes. Everybody there was a hero because they did their job. They knew what their job was. We had 2 or 3 that didn't, that took early release, and had a couple that cooperated with the North Vietnamese. And they stayed in until we came home. One was a Marine, unfortunately. And when he got to San Diego, he was met by a Marine general, and he was taken out of the loop as far as how we were processed back in. And he got out of the Marine Corps not too long after that. He'd been a squadron commander. He was a fair-haired boy with had stars in his eyes. And he just turned out to be a scum-sucking pig. And I think he may have passed away now, but just worthless. We wrote a thing. He was befriended by Jane Fonda and her husband, who I can't remember, Tom Hayden, I think. And he ran for a vacant seat on the Board of Governors or whatever they call it. Got it. And out in California. And we financed a full-page ad, had 200 signatures of POWs on it saying, this is what this guy did. Edison Miller. And he lost in a landslide. And one of our guys was living out in the Philippines, and he called up before the election and asked the Miller campaign, could they just understand that he'd like to put his name on it because Miller sued us all for $1 million apiece. He wanted to get in on that. Okay, I want to just jump down here and the Christmas bombing. God bless all those who came up there and bombed because we loved it. I was in Hanoi for the whole thing. And it was extremely exciting. I want to talk a little bit about coming home. And this will get to John McCain. John McCain was a very dear friend of mine, just absolutely like a brother. We didn't always agree. We had some humongous fights and disputes, and 10 minutes after the telephone conversation, we'd call each other up and say, that was really stupid, wasn't it? But he was a good guy. But when they're starting to separate us, and we figured it out, we would come home by date of shoot down with sick and wounded, and then as you know, the earliest guys came out first, and they separated us. John and I were living with a group of about 30 guys, and he and I had a fight about something. I forgot what it was about, not a physical fight, but just, and we slept side by side, and he wouldn't even talk to me. I mean, he's acting like a child. That's what they say down in Camilla, Georgia, where I'm from. He's acting like a child. But anyway, they called my name, and I roll up my gear, and they taking me out. And John came up and grabbed hold of my pajama thing. He said, Orson, I'm sorry we've had this fight. I apologize. It's my fault. I've been a little jerk. I said, you little shanty Irish bastard, I don't even want to talk to you. And I walked away from him, and I turned around and looked back at him, and he had just, like he couldn't believe I'd said that. I said, I'll see you when we get home. And shortly, about a month later, the release started. I came home to Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, Florida. My family was there, and we had the reunion. You all remember that stuff. A week or two weeks later, John McCain comes to Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, and he gets off the plane. I'm at the ramp down shaking. I told you I'd see you when we get home. You can be proud of us as a group who represented you, and all of you people that have talked today. You're true heroes. We were victims of a bad situation, and we did the best we could in the worst of circumstances. We came home, maximum percentage of divorces. We were larger, our percentage was bigger than the national average. We had lost family members. We came home to divorces. Wives, former wives had spent all the money. I mean, I could go through the list of tragedies, and it was comical almost. But you know, we kept going. We become doctors, lawyers, generals, admirals, members of Congress, prominent staffs in government, successful businessmen, authors, ministers. You name it, we've done it, which says one thing that I'd like to echo to you, to tell your children: don't you ever give up on this country. And I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Orson? Thank you, sir.
Oh, you dropped your paper.
Oh, all right.
I'm the last person that needs to be bending over. So thank you so
Well,
much.
I'll take your microphone, and on behalf of the Broomfield Veterans Museum, or the Veterans Museum Broomfield, we want to present you with this challenge coin that will hopefully remind you of the time you spent with us today.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.